They say the stone still breathes, buried beneath layers of scorched soil. Gold dust, and bones older than memory, and younger than Mytha, single black stone pulses faintly in the deep earth beneath Delphi. The ancients called it the Amphilista, navel of the world, but those who dug deeper, those who listened closely, whispered of something else, not an origin, a wound. Long before the sun bled over Mount Parnassus, before Apollo sang his truth through the lips of maddened women, and before Greece became Greece, there were voices in the dark beneath that mountain. Cold, steady voices. Voices that waited, and they were never meant to be woken. But everything begins with a question. Not a heroic question or a noble one, but a small, desperate, quiet thing. The kind of question that creeps behind your teeth, at night, when the room is too still and the air is too tight. It was asked by a slave. Her name was Lysandra. She had once been a noble's daughter, soft-skinned and loud-spirited. But war has a way of deciding fates that no god bothers to rewrite. She was sold at the port of Chalcis, passed through 3 masters, and finally given as tribute to the temple of Delphi, not out of piety, but as a tax deduction. Lysandra scrubbed floors. She boiled roots. She plucked the tongues from doves, and tied them with red thread, not knowing what they were used for. She slept beneath the altar stones on nights too cold for charity, and watched the Pythio, the oracle, speak in tongues no man could understand but every man feared. Then came the whispers. They didn't begin with a thunderclap. No lightning bolt, no mad omen, just a shiver. The oracle, old as driftwood and twice as cracked, began humming in her sleep. Not hymns, not prayers, something older. The tone was wrong like a memory scratched backward. And every time she sang, the fires in the temple hearth flickered blue dot. No one paid attention. Not really, until the ravens came. They blackened the roof of the temple like soot. Hundreds of them, then thousands, silent. Not a single caw, not a flap of wing. They just watched. When Lysandra threw stones at them, they didn't budge. When the high priest sacrificed a goat, the blood didn't pour. It climbed, curling like a vine around the blade. Then, one night, the oracle's voice changed. She spoke clearly, coherently, in a voice that wasn't hers. The wound remembers. Those 3 words, spoken like a warning, or maybe a plea. The temple scribe wrote it down, and then tore the parchment in half, because he'd heard that phrase before. Carved in a tomb, sealed 3 dynasties ago. Deep within the mountains. Sighed, so old even the Titan myths didn't remember its name. A tomb they weren't supposed to enter. A tomb built when Delphi was not Delphi, but something far older. Something that was not meant to be remembered. But the oracle remembered. She remembered everything, and the mountain began to crack. Tiny fractures at first. Stones falling like raindrops, then larger ones. Statues split. Columns moaned in the night like sick animals. The priests called for Apollo. They fasted. They sang. They poured honeyed wine into the cracks. Nothing answered. Nothing divine, at least. But Lysandra. She listened. She'd heard the old woman's muttering. She'd watched the oil in the offering bowls swirl into symbols no one else dared interpret. And one night, she followed the sound, not the humming, not the crackling stone, a heartbeat, steady, distant, but rising. Coming from below there was a passage one the other slaves didn't use. A thin slit in the wall behind the statue of Leto. They said it led nowhere. That the priests had walled it off centuries ago. After the last Pythia went mad and burned herself alive on a throne of crushed laurel leaves. But Lysandra knew better. The wall wasn't sealed, just hidden, and when she pushed it, it moved. The tunnel beneath the temple of Delphi did not smell like earth. It smelled like age. A choking sweetness, like rotting honey and iron. The air was hot, but not from fire, more like the inside of a buried mouth. And the heartbeat grew louder. She carried only a bowl of oil and a strip of cloth. The makeshift torch flickering as shadows danced along carvings too old to be Greek. Not even linear, not even Mycenaean. These symbols curved and looped in. Ways that hurt the eyes. The kind of writing that wanted to be forgotten. But she walked deeper, down past the place where the air buzzed with pressure. Past the walls that seemed to sweat. Until she came upon it. The stone, not large, not grand, but so black it drank the light, and it pulsed once. Then again, then a voice, not loud, not soft, but final. We were gods before the gods were born. Lysandra dropped the torch. The flame didn't die. It turned blue. The stone turned warm. And then she saw them figures moving in the walls, trapped behind the stone like flies in amber. But these weren't men. Wreathed in antlers, crowned in flame, they watched her with eyes carved from ice and void. Not evil, not good, just old. One of them smiled. The stone split, not cracked open, and from it came a sound like memory unraveling. She saw cities burning, seas walking, skies that bled, names she did not know, but somehow remembered. Carrick Laffer, Mezzadine, the bleeding root, words that curled around her bones, and they spoke, not aloud. Inside her, not as voices, but as thoughts, long buried. The wound must bleed, and she knew without knowing how that they were not dead. They were sealed, bound by rites older than Olympus, older than the Titans, older than the sky. And the oracles the old Pythia had been their tether, not their prison. Their bridge she had failed to contain them. Her mind had cracked, but Lysandra, she could hear them, understand them. And they were so glad she had come. Then came the trembling. The earth above moaned. A statue collapsed. The ravens screamed, finally, and Lysandra smiled. Because in her blood, something ancient stirred. Something buried in her, lineage, a fragment of a name never spoken aloud. A heritage traded for chains, forgotten by time, but remembered by the wound. She was not just a slave. She was their key, and the gods of Olympus. They were already too late. The stone never closed again. Once it opened once, the pulse of those buried voices found air to breathe. It remained ajar, like a door nudged open by a child's hand that never expected it to move. But now it breathed freely, and what seeped through that breath was not wind. It was something older than wind. Lysandra did not return to the temple floor that night. The torch she had dropped continued to burn, but no longer needed oil. Its blue flame hovered, weightless and obedient, trailing behind her like a loyal shadow. She descended further, barefoot and silent, as if summoned. The walls no longer whispered, they welcomed. They peeled back, revealing narrow passages that should not have existed. Spaces between time where dust did not fall, and sound did not echo. She found the chamber beneath the chamber, a hollow carved in the stone. Not by tools, but by belief in ancient, suffocating belief. Here, the air was thicker, soaked in the breath of things that had not exhaled in centuries. And in the center stood a pedestal of bone-white marble, slick with condensation, though no moisture was present. Upon it, an object that hummed, a mask that was not crafted. It was formed, carved from no metal, no wood, no substance known to mortals. Its surface shimmered with threads of silver and ash, its eye sockets wide and waiting. And without understanding why, Lysandra reached for it, not because she wanted to, but because her fingers had already begun. The moment it touched her skin, she remembered. Not her own memories, not even human ones. She remembered a forest without leaves, a sky that wept ink, a choir of 9 million voices screaming in harmony. She remembered a name spoken in reverse, a sacrifice made beneath 3 dying suns, a pact written in skin. She gasped, but no breath came. The mask did not cover her face, it joined it, slid over her flesh like a second skin, as if it had always been there, forgotten only by the mercy of sleep. And then, the heartbeat stopped. The silence that followed was not relief, it was awakening. The mask blinked. Somewhere above, the temple cracked once more. A great cypress outside the sanctum split down the middle without sound. The oracle, asleep in her chamber, opened her mouth and bled smoke. The slaves bolted upright. The priests fumbled for charms. And the ravens took flight. Not upward, but down. They dove toward the earth in a great black spiral, vanishing into the cracks, as if summoned to attend a funeral no human had been invited to. Lysandra rose. She was not herself. Or perhaps she finally was. The mask had no mouth, but when she spoke, her voice carried like iron against bone. "Bring the blood." And the mountain obeyed. It began with whispers inside the minds of the weak, the old, the drunk, the grieving. The temple guards found themselves walking without will, descending toward the forgotten stair, clutching torches that sputtered blue. The goats refused to be sacrificed, not out of terror, but because they no longer recognized the gods above. One priest gouged out his own eyes and laughed as he bled, claiming he saw a throne made of broken teeth. And through it all, Lysandra waited. Time inside the lower chamber stretched and bent. What felt like hours was minutes. What felt like seconds were eternities. The mask gave her no sleep, no hunger, only memory. She remembered rituals lost before Olympus was born. She remembered the first tongue a language with no verbs, only intentions, and she began to speak it, one word, each night. Carved into the walls with her fingernails. The stone peeled like fruit. The letters glowed. The mountain responded. Each word woke something, a ripple, a name, a vision. She saw Apollo fall from his chariot, his body eaten by crows. She saw Hera whispering to a mirror, only for the mirror to grin back with a stranger's face. She saw Athena sobbing in a ruin of feathers, her owl drowned in oil. These were not futures. These were possibilities, the world, unwritten, waiting for its authors to return. And that was the truth. The gods of Olympus were not the first. They were usurpers, children playing in the ash of a burnt empire, and the ones buried beneath Delphi. They were not monsters. They were the originals, the elder pantheon, deities not born of light or order, but of need-raw, unfiltered desire, hunger incarnate. They did not rule with law or thunder, but with presence. They were not worshipped, they were obeyed. Before the stories were written, before the stars were mapped. Their names held the world in balance. But balance is boring, and so they were overthrown not by strength, not even by courage. By story, the Olympians wrote a better one, cleaner, simpler, gods of sun and war and wine. Heroes with flaws, mortals with purpose. And the world chose the prettier lie, so the elder pantheon slept dreamily as, until now, until the mask found its face, until Lysandra, last of a bloodline that had once lit candles in their name, returned home, and above, the world began to crack. The animals knew first. Goats refused to eat. Dogs howled without end. Fish floated belly up in sacred springs, their eyes black as coal. Birds flew in perfect circles, then dropped from the sky like broken arrows. The farmers did not understand. The priests gave them prayers. But the winds did not blow. The soil did not breathe. The mountain had become still, not quiet. Still, because it was listening. And below, Lysandra stood in the center of a spiral of symbols. She had carved the final word. It glowed, not white, but red dot. And through the wall behind her, flesh began to form. Not human, not animal. A shape becoming antlers, wings, eyes without lids, mouths without lips. It breathed backward. The air folded. In dot, then a voice. You have fed the wound. Now, open it. And she did, with a single drop of her own blood, pressed into the final rune. The wall did not break. It peeled, folded, like wet paper. A gate revealed not of iron or bone, but of remembering. And through it stepped the first. It wore no name. Names were for those who needed to be remembered. This one was never forgotten, only buried. It stood on hooves made of smoke, its ribcage open like a blooming flower. From it poured breath. Each breath became a bird. Each bird spoke in riddles. It looked at Lysandra and did not thank her. Gods do not thank. They consume, and so it walked past her. Upward toward the world that had forgotten. Others followed. One, crawling upside down with limbs that moved like questions. One, shaped like a harp strung with eyes. One, whose laughter stitched the air into a cloak of screaming wind. Each passed through the gate. Each carried part of the story that was meant to be. And Lysandra remained, because her part was not to walk with them. Her part was to wait, to hold. The gate opened to become the wound. The mask pulsed once, twice, and then her body cracked, not broke. Her skin became marble, her voice a vibration, her soul a hinge. She did not cry. She did not scream. She endured. Above, the temple of Delphi collapsed, but not from explosion, not from war, from return, and in the cities of men, the dreams began. Children woke screaming of songs in a language they could not know. The mad began speaking in symbols. The sea turned red, not with blood, but with ink. Stories changed themselves. Scrolls rewritten. Statues wept, and the stars rearranged into shapes no philosopher could name. The gods of Olympus felt it. Zeus, upon his throne of lightning, looked to the east and felt fear. True fear, not of death, but of irrelevance, because something had remembered its name, and it was coming. They did not march. They flowed out from the womb of stone. Through the cleaved earth and into the breathless dark of Delphi came the first of the elder gods, formless, not because they lacked shape, but because shape had forgotten how to contain them. They moved like questions, like echoes of prayers never spoken aloud, like smoke rising from a fire that hadn't yet begun to burn, and the world, our world, began to ripple. Reality, it turned out, was thin, not fragile like glass. Thin like parchment, tight-stretched and overused, inked with too many versions of the same tale. The Olympians had scrawled their version over the old truth so many times that the original lines were smothered. But parchment remembers, ink bleeds, and Delphi was bleeding now. The first of them rose into the night, not as conquerors but as corrections. Not gods with demands, but truths that no longer agreed to be hidden. They moved through air like oil, through cities like plague, and they whispered their names not to be worshipped, but to be known. And that was enough. The first name spoken was Hera, the forgotten clock, whose veins kept time beneath the crust of mountains. As she passed, all sundials stopped. Sand no longer fell. The stars above paused in their rotations. Time did not halt. It simply forgot how to move. The second was Urael, the mirror that swallows light, whose body shimmered with the regrets of the living. Wherever he stepped, shadows grew long and heavy, as if remembering every secret ever hidden. He did not speak. He only reflected. And those who looked too long saw versions of themselves that had never been born, but screamed for attention. The third, Zothamani, whose wings were woven from the first lies ever told by mankind, spread his feathered limbs wide over the temple. Ruins his breath turned birds to ash and laurel leaves to flame. He whispered riddles into the ears of poets, who then wept and tore their tongues out to stop the sounds from returning. But these were only the forerunners. The true names, the ones carved in silence and sealed by flame, had yet to rise. And in the chasm where the temple once stood, the mountainside, the earth groaned like a body stretching after centuries of stillness. Trees bent inward. Rivers curved away. The animals fled. And far below, in the dark of the wound, Lysandra did not sleep. She could not. Her body was stone now, but her mind burned like the wick of a temple lamp. The mask had fused. The spiral was complete. She had become a thing that waited, not dead, not living, but open. Every heartbeat above her passed through her ribs. Every whispered prayer in every broken chapel traveled through her tongue. She had become the hinge between two worlds, and through her, the old gods sang. Not loudly, never loudly. They didn't need to, they simply remembered. And memory is heavier than thunder. The priests of Delphi, those who had not fled or gone mad, in a ruined courtyard, to light the last sacred fire. Their hands trembled, their eyes burned. They spoke the name of Apollo in every dialect they knew. But no answer came, because Apollo was gone, not dead, not absent. Gone as, if never written. Statues of him cracked down the center. Hymns rewritten themselves, mid-chant. The god of sun and prophecy had been replaced. Not destroyed, written by the ink of something stronger. In his place, a new form stood, a spiral of wings and flutes, bleeding light through teeth. Not a god, a reminder. And the world changed with him. In Athens, children awoke speaking in runes. In Sparta, warriors broke their own swords and buried them. In Thebes, the rivers reversed their flow. A great oracle was found scribbling stars into her skin, weeping, "The sky is a cage, and we are the songbirds." Rome heard the echoes too, though, an ocean away, the marble hearts of Jupiter's temples cracked down their foundations. The Sibylline books caught fire. No one could read them anyway, not anymore. The language had changed. Alphabets began to bend, letters shifting into shapes that no mouth could sound, but every mind feared it already knew. The philosophers tried to explain it. "Mass hysteria," said one. "Divine backlash," said another. "Too much fermented wine," muttered a third. But the birds kept falling, and the dreams kept coming. Each night, across kingdoms and islands and seas, mortals dreamed of hands made of smoke, eyes made of silence, temples made of teeth. The old gods came to them not with gifts or blessings, but reminders. They had always been there, and in the dreams, one figure stood among them, Lysandra, not stone, not servant. She stood taller now, her skin pale as ash, her mask alive with flame. And coil, she held a scroll now. Not a scroll, a tongue, long and knotted. When unrolled, it sang, and when it sang, kingdoms crumbled. Each dream ended the same. The dreamer would whisper, "The wound remembers," and then awaken sobbing, bleeding, or worse. Meanwhile, Olympus trembled. Its pillars cracked, its fountains froze, and the gods, the new gods, the Olympians, gathered. Zeus stood atop the shattered thunderclouds, his brow furrowed, his lightning no longer sang. Poseidon raised his trident, but the sea refused to obey. It bubbled with the scent of old blood, and drifted with teeth older than whales. Hera clutched at her temples, unable to stop the whispers. The Furies sobbed. The Muses forgot their names. Even Athena's owl went blind. They had forgotten the oldest rule. Even gods can be forgotten. And now, the ones they replaced were remembered. Zeus spoke of war. Ares sharpened his blades, but found they rusted as he held them. Hephaestus lit his forge, but the fire died. Only Hades remained silent. He remembered. He always had. He had seen the wound. He had walked its edge once, long ago, before his brothers carved Olympus from song and stone. He remembered the first voice, the hunger that never left, the pact sealed in silence, and now it had returned. He said nothing. He simply went back underground. Because some things do not need to be fought. Some things need to be avoided, and far below. Lysandra's eyes opened, stone cracked. Flame surged through the spiral, and through the gate behind her, a hand reached out. It wore rings, carved from moons. Its fingers were too long, its knuckles too many. It moved like silk in oil. It touched the air, and the room grew cold, then hot, then silent, and from its palm fell a seed, small, dark, beating a god's heart. It struck the stone, and the mountain screamed. The scream traveled through roots, through bones, through dreams. It cracked mirrors. It shattered bells. And above, in the sky, stars blinked and did not come back. The world tilted, and Delphi woke, not the city, the thing. Delphi was not a place. It had never been a place. It had never been a place. It was a name, a promise, a prison, and prisons do not forget their prisoners. The wound remembers, and it is not done bleeding. The seed did not fall. It planted itself. No soil, no water, no light, just ancient, fractured stone, warm with memory and damp with the breath of gods, too long buried. It sank into the earth like a whisper into flesh, rootless, but still it grew, and as it grew, the mountain wept. Not with tears, with colored blood that wasn't blood trickled through the seams of rock and temple ruin amber. Black, sometimes shimmering like silver beetles, but it moved with purpose. It spelled shapes. It circled cracks. It slithered up statues, pulsing like veins across once holy ground. The scent followed salt and iron, cloves and decay, myrrh, dust, thunder. The city of Delphi was no longer a city. It had become a memory in reverse. People spoke in riddles now. They woke up saying names no language had held for 10,000 years. The bakers sang in chords that bent glass. The children wrote spirals in ash, And the animals, they still refused to come near. Birds veered away mid-flight. Cats stared at walls. Dogs whimpered and bit their own tails until they bled. The sky above wasn't blue anymore. It was too still. Clouds hung frozen, refusing to drift. The sun rose, but no one felt its warmth. It simply hovered glaring, watching. The stars blinked during daylight. No one could say why, and beneath it all, in the earth's deepest belly, the wound widened. Lysandra no longer moved. She didn't need to. Her pulse had become a drumbeat, within her chest, but within the earth itself. Entire cities now beat in rhythm to her breath. She had merged with the gate. Her limbs were coils of stone and thought. Her voice, when it spoke, came from the mouths of priests in temples that had never named her. But they named her now. They named her in blood. A new cult had formed not by choice, but by infection. Across the Mediterranean, in Corinth, in Delos, in Knossos, and beyond, pilgrims arrived in droves with wide eyes and inked tongues. They brought with them gifts, broken fingers, silenced singers, jars of sand from dreams they could no longer forget. None remembered how they got there. None remembered their names. Only one word remained in them: Lysandra. Not a name anymore. A condition. They wore masks of clay, burned with runes they did not understand. They did not sleep. They did not eat. They danced until their legs broke. They carved spirals into every surface they found. When they bled, the blood sang in Delphi, pulsed with their madness. Each ritual opened another vein in the world. Hills rose where there had been none. Rivers reversed, carving new paths through cities that now existed only on maps. Entire towns blinked from memory, replaced with shrines that were older than time and fresher than rain. And in the deepest dark, the wound began to speak back, not in words, in events. It began with the collapse of the oracle houses. Every one of them from Dodona to Claros caved in overnight. Statues toppled, scrolls caught fire, and the sacred springs boiled away. The Pythias screamed as one, their final words echoing through cities like prophecy made flesh. We were not first. Then came the water. It rained, but not from clouds. From the mouths of statues, from cracks in cave walls, from the eyes of painted gods. Salt water, thick with moss and fragments of scale. It tasted of memory. It filled wells and tombs and wine, jars, and in every pool, faces floated, eyes open, mouths moving. Always the same phrase. She is remembering. The gods above grew restless. Not all gods, though. Only the Olympians. The Titans stirred in Tartarus, but did not rise. They watched. They remembered. They heard the song and felt it echo through their old bones. Even Kronos smiled, because this wasn't war. This was debt, and it was finally being collected. On Olympus, Zeus shattered his scepter. It did not protest it, simply crumbled. Poseidon called to the sea, but only foam answered. Hera wept in her garden of eternals, watching her sacred peacocks dissolve into feathers made of ink. Athena's scrolls rewrote themselves, diagrams curving into spirals she could not read. Ares struck his blade against the sky until it broke. Nothing. Changed, nothing answered. The world had shifted from their grip, like a fish slipping through cracked fingers. And in the mortal realm, silence took root. Not absence, attention. The kind of silence that arrives when something is listening very, very closely. Temples went dark. Torches flickered blue. And across the sea, in Rome, the Vestal virgins burned down their own sanctuary, singing songs from a time before flame. They said the gods no longer demanded chastity. They demanded sight. And sight came, but not the kind anyone had asked for. Lysandra was not the only key. Others were waking, in a village in Anatolia. A boy born with no tongue opened his mouth and screamed stars. His scream killed 7 men. In Alexandria, a scroll surfaced written entirely in teeth polished and bleached, arranged in perfect lines. It told the story of the before. No one who read it remained sane. In Athens, the dead rose not to walk, but to listen. They sat in circles beneath ruined altars, heads tilted, as if hearing something beneath the soil. They whispered things to the living, secrets, names. They spoke of the folded age, when thought and flesh were not separate, when gods were not made, but uncovered, when every prayer was just a recollection. And they said this: the wound is not a place. It is a memory, and we are inside it. The world began to tilt, not physically, not visibly, but spiritually. People felt it, like standing sideways, like walking uphill through a world pretending to be flat. Time warped, events reversed. A man in Thasos lived a month backward and drowned in rain that hadn't yet fallen, and still. The old gods rose, not all at once, one by one, like stars reappearing after a long clouded night. One came shaped like a storm in the shape of a woman. Her eyes were doorways. Her hands left frost wherever they touched. She spoke only in numbers, but they bled. Her followers froze to death, smiling. Another walked as a child with a mouthful of glass. He hummed songs no ear could hear, but bones cracked just to stay in rhythm. A third was a flock of birds moving with one mind, one hunger. They did not eat flesh, they ate certainty. And where they flew, doubt was born like wildfire. Then came the harp god. His strings were made of sinew, his crown of veins. He played no music, but when he touched his own chest, mountains moved to let him pass. He looked like grief, and the world grieved with him, because something ancient had broken, and what leaked out was not chaos, it was truth. Lysandra had become a beacon, not of light, of restoration, a rebalancing force. Her spiral had rewritten the laws, not destroyed them, rewritten them in the ink of those forgotten, those buried too deep to mourn. And it was only just beginning. The wound had opened, but the heart beneath, it was still beating. Faster now, louder, and each pulse was another god remembering their name. The heart beneath Delphi beat once more, and this time, the sound echoed upward, through layers of limestone and forgotten prayer, through the ruins of temples no longer named, through roots that had curled away from their own birthplaces. The pulse struck the bones of men, the spines of statues, the water in clay jars. It hit the chest of every living thing with the same message, wordless, yet loud enough to stop breathing. A second beat followed, slower, heavier, and between them, silence opened like a door. Those who heard it did not remember the sound. They remembered what they used to be. In Thrace, a woman baking bread dropped her hands mid-kneed, staring into the oven as if it had whispered her birthright. In Carthage, a dying soldier stood from his own pyre, speaking fluent Akkadian, despite never having known more than one tongue. In Delphi, a cat curled beneath a column and began to hum in perfect hexameter. Not a single word of it was new. They were all rememberings. The gods beneath Olympus were not reborn, they were reinstalled, because the world had never truly forgotten them. It had only agreed to pretend. But pretending takes energy, and the world had grown tired, so the mask returned. Not just Lysandra's, they began to appear everywhere on doorsteps, inside wells, nailed to trees. Masks made of bark and copper, feathers and ash, always carved with a spiral where the mouth should be. People put them on, not out of choice, out of agreement. Like recognizing an old friend in a crowd, and nodding because the moment required it. And once they wore them, they spoke with voices that did not belong to them. They didn't speak prophecy, they spoke memory. One boy in Epirus put on a mask of green wax and whispered. There was a forest made of tongues. Each tree spoke one life. The wind was made of erasure. A blind elder in Lesbos wore a mask of polished bone and cried, My hands once held time like clay. I shaped it, I broke it. I was punished with silence. A child not yet named put on a mask of mirrored glass and simply sang. Her voice wilted olives. Her tears carved scripture into the stone where she sat, and through them all, Lysandra listened. She was no longer beneath Delphi. She was Delphi, the stones that broke under sandals. Her spine, the air that thickened over ruins. Her breath, the blood that pulsed through pilgrims. Her rhythm, her name was no longer spoken with fear or reverence. It was spoken as if it had always belonged in the mouth. A vowel remembered. A consonant reclaimed Lysandra. Not a prophet, not a priestess. A hinge.eng hinge's turn. When they do, doors open. And one opened over the Aegean. In the dead of night, a fissure bloomed beneath the sea. It did not crack. It peeled, like a wound remembering its trauma. The ocean above it bubbled, boiled, then calmed. No tsunami came, no roar. Only a soft hiss, like the sigh of a god too tired to warn. And from the fissure came silence. Ships sank, without struggle. Fish floated belly up in perfect lines. Sailors wept themselves dry and jumped into calm waters, murmuring, "We hear the choir." The choir did not stop. It grew. Voices that had never learned language began to harmonize. Mountains hummed. Wheat fields swayed in rhythm. And above it all, in the forgotten places, caves that breathed, tombs that blinked, stones that pulsed, they returned. Not gods, not quite names. The world had been built upon them, and now they returned to collect what was owed. One appeared in the heart of Ephesus, a woman woven from copper wire and mourning doves, trailing veils that never touched the earth. Every step she took caused mirrors to fracture, not shatter, but fracture showing 10,000 versions of the same grief. She never spoke, but those who looked at her saw their first regret and forgot how to lie. Another emerged in the market. Square of Pergamon, a man without organs, made entirely of bells. He rang when he moved, but he moved like fog, quiet, steady, everywhere. People followed. They called him the Toll. None returned. A third arrived, in silence, riding a chariot made of ribs, pulled by wolves with no mouths. It did not matter what he looked like. No one remembered afterward. Only the feeling of loss. As if they had forgotten someone who had just left the room, and the skies began to change. Not their color, their meaning. Constellations twisted into glyphs. Nightfall arrived earlier. Dawn delayed itself. The moon blinked, twice, then rotated not in orbit, but in purpose. Astronomers recorded it, but had no terms. One simply wrote, "We are being rewritten," and that was the truth. The world was not ending. It was being revised. The Olympians felt it. Dionysus awoke drunk, though he had not tasted wine in days. His vines bore thorns. His laughter turned bitter. He tried to sing, but the notes caught fire mid-air. Hermes, god of travel, could not find his own path. Every road led back to the same ruin, the old altar at Delphi, now a spiral of bones and song. He walked in circles until he vanished. Even Hestia, goddess of the hearth, found her flames cold, her warmth gone, her temples empty. It wasn't just the end of Olympus. It was the end of interpretation. These were not new gods. These were not rivals. They were reality, remembering its true form. And the last to return came not in form, but in feeling, the god of absence, the one whose name cannot be spoken, because it is the sound silence makes when it realizes it is being watched. It came as a gap in thought, a moment skipped mid-conversation, a blink that lasted too long. People dropped their spoons, forgot their children's names, looked at the sea and wept without knowing why. And in the spiral beneath Delphi, something moved. Lysandra's ribs parted, not broken, revealed, and from them came the last memory. Not a god, a moment. It hovered between breaths, between thoughts, between heartbeats, and then it sang. It sang, not with voice, not with language, with remembrance, and remembrance is the loudest sound in the world. When it sang, no ears heard, but every bone responded. It wasn't melody, it wasn't even sound, it was shape. A pressure behind the eyes, a pulse behind the teeth. It moved through the earth like oil through cloth staining. Slow, permanent dot across the Aegean, fires extinguished, not from wind, not from water, but from consent. As if the flames, themselves, bowed their heads and agreed. This is no longer our story, even in distant lands. People felt it. In Gaul, a blacksmith paused mid-blow and found his hammer humming. In Egypt, an old priest, a Thoth collapsed while writing, ink pouring endlessly from his fingers. In Judea, the temple veil twitched once, then turned to salt. It was the moment, the one memory that did not belong to a god, or a man, or even time itself. The first forgetting, and now it had been unforgotten. The moment the world had agreed, collectively, to erase truth, to veil certain names in myth, to shackle divinity with narrative, to bury what was too vast, too luminous, too unspeakable. Beneath gods shaped like men, it had taken form, and it had returned, not to punish, to restore, because all lies, even divine ones, rot eventually, and the rot had reached Olympus. No longer just cracked marble and sputtering torches. Now the air itself felt wrong, sweet with decay, ripe with endings. The gods clutched their symbols like drowning men clutching stone. Apollo played his lyre and wept when it sang only silence. Artemis loosed arrows into the sky and watched them curve back, toward her. Even Aphrodite, eternal in her vanity, could no longer find her reflection. Every pool turned to ash. Every mirror fogged with breath that was not hers. They held council. They called it war. But none of them remembered how to begin one. Because war requires direction. And direction had been stolen. Rewritten. The roads were gone. Not the paths carved through land, but the metaphysical roads. The ones carved by belief. And now, those paths led only one way. Down, back, inward. To the spiral, to the wound. To Lysandra, she no longer sat. She no longer breathed. She was the axis. She was the stillness around which all movement now pivoted. Her hair coiled into rivers. Her mask bled ink that etched symbols into passing birds. Her hands spread wide not in welcome, but in acceptance, and from her mouth flowed the last story, not in words, in names. Names no mortal throat could pronounce. But every soul could feel like remembering your mother's voice before birth, or the color of fire when the world was still made of thought. She spoke them all, one by one, each name. Peeled back another layer of reality. With every name. A city cracked. With every name. A god trembled. With every name. The air thickened until even time coughed, and somewhere far across the wind-dark sea, a temple turned itself inside out. Not destroyed, inverted. Its inner sanctum became its outer walls, its relics became doors. Its columns sang. The priests inside laughed until their tongues fell out. The stars above it blinked in new constellations, names shaped like knives, masks, spirals, and the word undo, because that is what was happening now. The world wasn't ending. It was undoing. One god, old, beyond reckoning, tried to stop it. He had no name anymore. Only title, he who remembered the first silence. He descended into the earth not from Olympus, but from somewhere deeper, more private. A place between layers. He carried no weapon, only a bell. When he rang it, wounds withered. Clocks reversed. Suns blinked. He rang it once over Delphi. The mountain shivered, but Lysandra did not move. She only looked at him through the spiral of her mask, and in that gaze, he remembered something terrible. She was older than him. He rang the bell a second time. This time, it cracked, not the bell. Him. From collar to foot, his skin split like bark. Light poured out, golden, frantic, apologetic. He tried to sing, but his tongue had already burned. He tried to flee, but there were no roads left, only spirals. He fell into her, not onto her, into her, as if she were the gate he had long forgotten building, and the world sighed again. The third sigh since the mountain opened. The first had been tremor, the second, blood. The third was something else, a setting down, a relinquishment even. The gods felt it, especially the ones who had tried not to. The minor gods, the field spirits, the gods of grain and breath and echo. They had hidden in forests, under rivers, within dreams. But now, they too turned inward, folded, offered their forms back to the source, and were taken, not erased. Remembered Lysandra. Single quotes as form pulsed, swelled, bent. Her spine became mountain, her fingers wind, her breath silence. Her mask floated above it all, spinning, faster, faster, until its spiral broke, not into pieces, into pathways, across the earth. Gates opened, spirals carved into stone, etched, in dreams scrawled in the sand by wind that no one saw. Some opened sideways, some upward, some inside people, and each led to a different truth. Not the kind you tell, the kind you survive. One man entered and emerged as song. One woman entered and emerged as memory. One child entered and never emerged. But the world around her began to weep flowers. The spiral did not. Punish it revealed, and what it revealed was simple. The Olympians were not gods. They were stories, well told, deeply believed, repeated until their bones turned to temples. But stories, no matter how sacred, are fragile. And now the readers were gone, and the readers behind the readers had returned. The readers behind the readers had returned, and the spiral turned again, but not in place. It descended, with every revolution. It pulled more into itself, not with force, but with inevitability. The way flame invites the dry. The way music seduces. Silence. The spiral was not just a shape, now it was consent made form. And the earth answered, not all at once. In strange places, in wrong ways. A lake in Macedonia reversed. Its fish walked briefly on sand, whispering lines from lost plays. An entire town in Sicily found itself blinking in and out of shadow, alternating between noon and dusk. A vineyard in Thessaly grew. Grapes of glass, sweet bitter, and full of whispered dreams that burned the throat. People stopped asking why. They started listening, because now the land was speaking, not just Delphi. Everywhere, the stones trembled. Not with earthquakes but with memory. Not metaphorical memory, physical recollection. They remembered the footprints of those who had passed, the prayers once carved into their skins, the hands that had worshipped older things, and the temples built atop them began to crack. Not collapse, crack, as if the truths buried beneath them were finally pushing back, and from the cracks came sounds. Not screams, lullabies, sung in voices no longer shaped like lungs. Songs built from wind and insect, echo and root. Songs that crawled into the ears of the sleeping and made them speak in languages they did not know, and in every tongue, the message was the same. Return what you borrowed. The gods understood. The Olympians, those painted giants of thunder and vanity, they understood at last. They had not created the world. They had inherited it, and now the lender had come. But how do you return something you've forgotten? Taking Zeus wept, not tears, not rain. He wept storms, thunder that cracked in pain, not rage, lightning that struck an apology. The sky dimmed not night, but shame. His eagles plummeted from the air, their feathers turned to stone mid-flight. His temples collapsed in silence, not a single scream inside. Just the wind, walking through dust. Poseidon fled the oceans. He dove into the Marianus of myth, deeper than story, hoping to outrun the spiral. But even there, beneath pressure no human could name, he saw it, carved into the bones of the sea, the spiral, not chasing him, waiting, he screamed. The tides rose. The ships vanished. No one noticed because land was breaking now, breaking open. Mountains uncoiled like serpents, waking from stone. Valleys lifted like pages turning. Trees bent backward and touched the earth with their crowns. And from beneath all things, the oldest breath rose. It tasted of dust and honey, thunder and blood. Lullaby in command. It tasted like a promise. Lysandra no longer sat, she floated. Not above the ground, but above meaning. Her mask rotated endlessly, no longer bound to face or form. Her hair coiled into timelines, her hands unfolded into geography. Her ribs cracked and spilled rivers. She was not dead, she was not alive. She was remembering, and memory is a god. The cults that had once followed her dissolved into function. They no longer prayed. They became organs of her willage, a lung, a tendon, a knuckle of the new body she had formed from the world's regret. They moved without hunger. They moved without thought. They built things that looked like cities, and sounded like screams. In Thrace, a structure of bone and glass rose from the earth, spiraled like a conch shell, moaning quietly at dawn. In Crete, a labyrinth built itself not in walls, but in minds. Anyone who stepped near it forgot where they had been and who they had promised not to become. In Delphi, the stone split fully. The wound opened not as metaphor, but as entrance, and from it came the unthinkable. Not demons, not shadows. The scripts, the original ones, written not in ink, but in the movement of stars, the swing of atoms, the hesitation between heartbeats. They fell like ash and burned like answers. Each flake held a word. Each word rewrote history, not by changing it, by clarifying it. The gods were not banished. They were footnotes. They were summaries, carved from fuller beings that had once walked this earth uncloaked, and those beings had returned. One stepped across. Anatolia with legs that cracked time. Wherever her foot fell, centuries crumbled. Her name was written in angles, not letters. Her eyes were constellations turned inside out. Her voice, when it came, caused wheat to kneel. Another emerged from a mirror in Athens. His body was thin. As rumor his hands bent light. Every step he took, unmade coincidence. He whispered into ears that had never heard sound, and left laughter in his wake. The kind of laughter that means you've seen the end and understand why it had to happen. They did not speak to mortals. They reabsorbed them gently, lovingly, like parents returning to children who had outgrown their games, and the Olympians. They ran. Hermes turned to wind and fled into language. He hides now between metaphors, hoping never to be read. Apollo scattered into sunbeams, fragmented. He is no longer a god. He is warmth, ache, pressure, regret. Aphrodite dissolved into mirrors. Every time you love someone wrong, she watches. Waiting, Athena became silence, the kind that falls before wisdom or war. But Zeus remained not to fight, to beg. He knelt in Delphi, where Lysandra floated like the center of a storm that had forgotten how to rage. He offered his crown, his thunder, his name, and she did not look at him, because she did not need to. The spiral had already taken him, not with violence, with recognition. He had always been part of her, a fragment, a page, a caption beneath the true painting. And now the painting had been revealed. Across the world, the final gates opened. Some looked like churches, some like trees, some like eyes, and from each poured, not gods, not prophets, not even beings, but corrections. The wind carried new laws older than breath, newer than tomorrow. Stones rearranged themselves. Rivers curved in letters. Children sang the old names in the wrong order, and the right doors opened, and beneath Delphi, where the spiral first turned, Lysandra sang again. But this time, it was not memory, it was invitation. She had invited them, not with open arms, not with words, with absence, because by now, every thinking thing understood. Lysandra was no longer a priestess, no longer even a vessel. She was the hollow left when godhood withdraws, and that hollow had become a mouth, and that mouth had begun to speak, not in breath, not in syllables, but in undoing. The world did not fall silent. The world fell accurate. Mountains stopped pretending to be boundaries. Rivers refused to separate nations. Names curled backward into their native shapes, and entire cities blinked, realizing they had been built on mistakes, not lies, just wishes. And the gods were built from wishes, weren't they? Carved from hunger and fire and fear, shaped into symbols, then crowned as sovereigns. But now that fire had gone cold, now the fear had been named, and now the hunger belonged to someone else. They came not from sky or sea, but from within, the original ones, not older than gods, older than categories, beings with shapes unfit for vision, with thoughts too slow for minds. One appeared beneath Thebes, unfurling like a language forgotten mid-sentence. It did not speak. It only gestured, and the dead stood, not resurrected, just present, fully, calmly, waiting for their last task. Another emerged, at the edges of Crete. A shape made of collisions, a hum where nothing should be. It touched stone, and turned it to lore. It touched people, and turned them to eyes. And yet another smaller walked among children. No one saw her, but where she stepped, laughter remembered how to be sacred. This was no invasion. This was inheritance. The gods had borrowed this world. These beings had birthed it, and they were not angry. They were restorative. They moved through the forgotten seams of the world, through lullabies half remembered, through dreams skipped over in sleep, through those sudden moments when you feel watched but loved. They did not punish, they revealed. Each revelation cost something. One oracle looked into a bowl of oil and saw her own name reversed and crumbled into salt. A general raised his sword at a shadow and found himself speaking to his childhood pet, long dead, now asking if he remembered how to be kind. A widow sang the name of her husband at dusk and he returned, but not his body. As answer, and she wept, not for him but because she understood. The Olympians had no place in this restoration. They were flavors of chaos, palatable, poetic, powerful. But they had boundaries. They had narratives. And the world was no longer interested in those. Even mortals felt it. They stopped asking for meaning. They began asking for memory. Not of facts. Not of events. Not of who they had been before being told what they were. It became ritual, not carved, not taught, remembered. Children stood in spirals, drawn in dust. Elders whispered truths in tones they thought they'd forgotten. Farmers sang to their tools and felt the tools answer, not in speech and usefulness. The world was not reborn, it was returned. Returned to a state older than peace, a state where purpose was not given, but recognized. And Lysandra, she became less and more. Her body dissolved into pattern. Her thoughts became weather. Her mask was now the moon, visible only when forgotten. She passed through cities, not as presence, as influence. When she passed, rulers dreamed of soil, not thrones. When she passed, armies sheathed themselves. When she passed, libraries opened 2 pages that had not existed the night before. And in her wake came the final question. If gods were stories, and stories were wishes, then what happens when the wisher wakes? The gods tried, one last time. Not with thunder, not with war. With bargain. Hermes offered language. I will make new names, he said. Let me speak for you. I will rename time itself. But the spiral cannot be bargained with. It has no ears, only echo. Poseidon offered the sea. I will drown every falsehood. Let me flood away what offends you. But the spiral cannot be cleansed. It is not filth, it is origin. Aphrodite offered beauty. I will give you love in forms never seen. Let me shape desire again. But the spiral is not desire. It is the moment before desire. And Zeus last of Lofert. Silence. I will disappear, he whispered. Let me vanish with dignity. Do not erase me. But the spiral does not erase. It remembers too deeply to forget. And Zeus was remembered as thunder with shame. As power without direction. As voice without listening. So he bowed, and the sky broke with joy, not light, not rain. Joy. It rained laughter, it rained forgiveness, but not for the gods, for the mortals who had worn them, because all gods were masks, and all masks were once chosen, and the people began to remove them, not in haste, in ritual. A baker, in Piraeus, removed the mask of Apollo, long worn as certainty. He breathed, and found the bread now sang songs in the oven. A weaver in Rhodes removed the mask of Athena. Her threads moved of their own accord, dancing into symbols that healed the ill. A warrior in Sparta removed the mask of Ares and wept for the first time since childhood. His spear bent, then blossomed. They did not lose their gods. They relocated them, inside themselves, not as rulers, as possibilities. Each divinity, once external, now returned as internal compass. And Lysandra, in the spiral's deepest curve, began to diminish, not in power. In separation, she was no longer needed as mouthpiece, because the world itself was singing now. Singing of the time before gods. Had names of the time before prayer. Needed language. Of the time when divinity was not distant, but daily singing of fire that whispered, water that warned, wind that watched. The spiral pulsed once more, and the earth breathed. A final exhale, not of death, but of completion. The stories had ended, not stopped, concluded, but one story remained. The first one, the one never written, the one whispered before breath. And that story was waking. There was a word no longer spoken, not because it was forbidden, because it was final. A sound older than purpose, a syllable shaped like dawn. It lived once in the breath between thunder and silence, in the hush that follows an answer so absolute that even the sky does not dare comment. It had been the first word ever spoken, and now it had returned, not through speech, through alignment, because across the fractured skin of the world, the final alignments began, not of planets, not of stars, but of intents. Mountains leaned, rivers coiled. The roots of trees began to hum in harmonies older than fungi. Volcanoes slowed not, cooled, but paused. Even the insects moved in patterns. They formed runes no human had written, glyphs of intention, sigils of remembering dot all across the once divided world. The scattered limbs of a larger will stirred, and mortals who once looked skyward for gods now looked inward for themselves. They no longer called it magic. They called it recall. Recall of what the body had forgotten, what the dreams had buried, what the soul had outsourced to the sky. The spiral was not descending now. It was contracting, pulling every myth, every god, every unanswered prayer into a single nucleus of truth. Not the truth as in fact, the truth as in origin, in Delphi. Where it had all begun, there was no city now, only resonance. Stones hummed in frequencies that shattered lies and calcified nostalgia. The olive trees bled ink, not red, not black. Ink that could only be read by memory, not eyes. And the ink whispered of things the gods had taken and what they had failed to return. Lysandra was still there, but she no longer stood. She hovered, yes, but not in defiance of gravity, in acceptance of function. She had become Delphi's its breath, its pulse, its hourglass. Every second passed through her. Every ripple of truth moved because of her alignment. Her body was no longer a cage. It was a clarifier. She filtered the world's confusion, and what came out on the other side was purpose. Her mask, now utterly dissolved, had become a storm of symbols orbiting her head. Not orbiting as satellites, orbiting as consequences. And those symbols changed shape depending on who observed them. To a farmer, they were tools he never learned to use. To a widow, they were lullabies she never finished singing. To a child, they were futures. To a dying man, they were all the questions he had been too afraid to ask. She spoke rarely, but when she did, the world paused, not to obey, to remember. Her voice no longer used language, it used necessity. Each syllable rearranged memory. Each pause restructured time. And when she spoke 3 syllables in succession, a mountain in Anatolia collapsed, not from destruction, but from relief. It had been waiting to let go. Across the world, temples stood empty, not abandoned, reassigned. Worship was no longer offered, it was received by the earth directly. No intermediaries, no Olympians, because those Olympians had changed. Zeus, long surrendered, had become something quieter. Not a god, a weather system. Wherever someone let go of control, he drifted in storm, pressure, thunder. Hera had become a thread, a single thread that passed through every woman's hand who had ever made something with grief, a thread that never broke, even when pulled too tightly. Poseidon, refusing identity, had dissolved into currents, not of water, of choice. In every moment of indecision, his former will stirred, nudging, suggesting, not commanding. The sea still remembered him, but no longer obeyed. Hermes, language itself. He was in every metaphor, every mistranslation, every joke that felt too perfect to be coincidence. He didn't speak anymore. He happened. Athena had retired to silence, not as punishment, as promotion. Every time someone chose thought over reaction, she nodded from a place no longer real, an Apollo's sunlight that only warmed those who dared to feel. The gods had not died, they had adapted, because extinction is only for those who refuse to evolve. But what now stood on the horizon was not evolution, it was arrival. Not of things with names, but of the one who waited, the only being the spiral deferred to the first. Storyteller, the final reader, the one who had whispered creation into being and then forgotten it, not because it was flawed, but because forgetting was part of the plan. The one who waited walked now, not toward Delphi, toward recognition, and as it walked, Reality struggled, not against destruction, against clarification, because everything unworthy of its gaze began to evaporate. Whole cities, born of vanity, blinked into paper. Statues turned to regret. Languages crumbled into their most honest vowels. And people, those who had clung to borrowed meanings, collapsed into simpler things. Some became birds, others became ideas. One man became a doorway, and everyone who passed through him emerged speaking a single sentence in a voice not their own. The first lie was shape. The one who waited had no shape, not even potential. It walked without legs, spoke without sound, reached without motion. It was designed not to be understood, only felt, and the more people felt it, the more they changed. Not magically, inevitably, a queen abdicated. Not for politics, but because her crown suddenly whispered that it had never fit her soul. A soldier unbuckled his armor mid-battle, not out of fear, but because the sword no longer recognized him. A thief returned every coin she had ever taken, one by one. Over a year of silence, then vanished into the color blue. All without being commanded. The one who waited did not rule it, reminded. And each reminder unwound a story, and each unwinding revealed something truer than myth. And somewhere in the spiraled depths of Delphi, Lysandra raised her head not to speak, to receive. And from the sky, not above but within it, answered not in light, not in storm, but in permission. And the spiral stopped turning, not because it had ended, because it had begun again. The spiral had begun again, but this time it did not descend. It expanded, and as it expanded, it touched every thread ever spun by myth. Not to break it, but to tune it, because every story, even the false ones, had resonance. And resonance is never wasted. In a desert, outside Carthage, the bones of a forgotten king vibrated until they hummed a name no one had ever spoken aloud. But everyone had dreamt once, in the salt flats of Thessaly, mirrors bloomed like flowers, and those who gazed into them saw not their reflections, but their unborn regrets, nodding farewell. And across the drifting bones of ancient seas, clouds stitched themselves into phrases, short, sharp, and unforgiving. You were warned. The gods had no choice now. Their retreat was not enough. Their adaptation was not enough, because the world did not seek appeasement. It sought reunion, and reunion required sacrifice, not of blood, not of temples, of identity. So the last gods gathered, not in Olympus. That palace had become dust the moment memory began to speak. Not in Hades, he had long since retreated into rest. Having done his duty longer than any, they met in Delphi, not above, below, in the chamber where Lysandra now breathed, not with lungs, but with the pulse of all that is unspoken. She was not alone. The one who waited had arrived, and it was no longer walking, it was witnessing. The difference was total. When it walked, things shifted. When it witnessed, things knew themselves, and under that gaze, every god fell to their knees. Not in reverence, in recognition. Zeus lowered his head, not as king but as son, not of Kronos, of consequence. He whispered no apology. He merely exhaled thunder and let it dissolve. Poseidon unclenched his grip on the sea. Let the tides flood his chest, his trident sink into silt, his name dissolve into current. Athena removed her helmet. Her owl flew off her shoulder, not in flight, but in graduation, no longer needed, no longer tied. Aphrodite let her beauty collapse, not into ugliness, into clarity. For beauty that demands worship is dead, and she was done collecting Hermes. Unwrapped the last bandage around his tongue. Beneath it was a question. No one answered it. That was enough. Apollo sang one final note. It was silence. Hera broke her crown with her own hands, and from it fell not gold, but years. Years she had held things together, with obligation, fury, etiquette. She stepped back from the pedestal and sat for the first time since betrayal was born. And in the center, Lysandra lifted her hand, only once. And in that gesture, the spiral responded. Not with light, with choice. Because now the world had reached its culmination, not the end of time. The option to continue it, all of existence, was given a question. Would you like to remember why you started? No one was required to answer aloud. The body answered for them. Some vanished, not in pain. In completion, they had lived enough, dreamt enough, worn enough stories. Others changed, not into beasts or stars, but into selves they had always suspected were waiting beneath the surface. A mute girl in Crete grew feathers only on her spine. She spoke a language only the wind understood, and the storms listened. A butcher in Macedon wept until his tears grew roots. Each root became a sentence. Each sentence grew a fruit. Those who ate from the fruit forgot how to lie. A poet in Lesbos turned to vapor and lived in the space between words. She was not read. She was felt. The spiral did not demand uniformity. It revealed it, because beneath every variation of faith, war, harvest, and prayer, there had been only one force moving, one idea, and it had worn every name. Chaos, love, destiny, justice, flame. But its true name was never spoken, because its true name was a shape, and that shape was home. Lysandra was the first to speak it, not with tongue, with presence. She became it, and in doing so, she ceased, not died. Ceased to need division. She became sky. She became mirror. She became the moment before music begins, and the gods. They were offered passage. Some accepted. Athena walked backward, into a library, and became architecture. Hermes dissolved into idioms, and half were remembered. Jokes, Hera, returned to her mother's lap. Whomever she had once been and slept, but Zeus stayed. Of course he did. Not from pride, from curiosity. He wanted to see what came next, and so he shed his title, his lightning, his names, and sat in the dust beside the mortals he had once ruled, and for the first time listened, not to prayers, to possibilities. The world did not explode. It did not rebirth. It softened. It remembered. It held itself, quietly, like a child waking from a fever dream. And in the great stone beneath Delphi, where the spiral had first stirred, where stories had first bent and broken, a flower bloomed, small, blue dot, unnamed. A child touched it, tanned. Did not name it. They simply smiled. Because some things now were allowed to be beautiful, without definition. The spiral no longer turned. It had become a circle, and circles, as we all know, never truly end.